Hey VC, David Newton here at Untitled Vinyl, here to do a thread response that my good buddy Rob Walker started, in which he's wanting us to do kind of matchups. He gave a list of 20 pairings, and he wants us to pick our favorite band or artist in each of these pairings. So kicking things off with the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. I like the Stones and the Beatles. I've got multiple albums from both the bands in my vinyl collection. I've been a Beatles fan longer than I've been a Stones fan, and for me, the Beatles, their albums were consistently good, whereas the Stones have a few that I would consider not so great. So I'm going with the Beatles for the first matchup. Next is the Who versus the Kinks. I think I have two Kinks albums in my collection, Lola and a Greatest Hits compilation. I've got several Who albums, Who's Next, Who by Numbers, Quadrophenia, Tommy. I'm not really huge fans of either of the bands, but if we're going based on what I have in my collection, I'm going to go with the Who. Next is the Doors versus the Byrds. I've got one or two albums from each of the bands in my collection. Both bands are bands that have to be in the mood to listen to. I really like the guitar work and the harmonies that the Byrds have in their music. But as far as which one I would probably listen to more than the other, I'm going to go with the Doors. Sometimes, you know, the keyboard solos from Ray Manzarek can be a little wearing, but I like more of the hits from the Doors than I do the Byrds. Next we have Kate Bush versus Peter Gabriel. I know nothing about Kate Bush. I don't have any of her albums in my collection. If I had to name a song to save my life, I couldn't do it. I do have 3 or 4 of Peter Gabriel's albums, so I'm going to go with Peter Gabriel for this matchup. Next up we have Marvin Gaye versus Stevie Wonder. I like Stevie Wonder, but after a while I feel like his songs are all start sounding the same. I really like Talking Book and Songs in the Key of Life, but other than that, some of his radio hits were just kind of eh. Marvin Gaye, I do have What's Going On in his greatest hits. I know more of Marvin Gaye's hits than I do Stevie Wonder's, so I'm going with Marvin Gaye. Next we have U2 versus Echo and the Bunnymen. I don't have anything from Echo and the Bunnymen in my collection. I do, however, have several U2 albums. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with U2. Sometimes Bono can be really pretentious, and I get tired of hearing his politics and stuff. But I would say I would have to pick U2 over Echo and the Bunnymen. Next we have Wings versus ELO. This one's tough. I really like some of Paul's solo work, and some of the stuff he did with Wings is great. But I really like some of the 70s albums from ELO. I'm gonna have to go with ELO as much as I like Paul McCartney. So Jeff Lynne and ELO for me. Next one, Joy Division versus the Smiths. I don't know anything about Joy Division. I know that album with kind of the squiggly lines on it is like their biggest selling album. I don't own it. I don't know anything from it. The Smiths I cannot stand because I don't like Morrissey whatsoever. I do like oh crap, his name's, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Johnny Marr. I like Johnny Marr's guitar playing. I have a few of his solo albums, but I cannot stand the Smiths, and I don't know Joy Division, so I'm going to call this one a draw. Next we have Iggy Pop versus Lou Reed. I do have albums from both of these artists in my collection, but I would say I'm more inclined to listen to Iggy Pop than I am Lou Reed, so Iggy Pop for that one. Elton John versus Van Morrison. I don't have anything in my collection from Van Morrison. I know Astral Works is one of his big albums, and Moon Dance is another one. But really, Brown Eyed Girl, I've heard that song so many times, and that's kind of unfair for me to say, but it kind of turned me off from Van Morrison. I am a big fan of Elton John, especially his work in the 70s, so this one goes to Elton John. Next we have Bob Dylan versus Neil Young. This one's tough too. Two more artists that I have to be in the mood to listen to. I like Bob Dylan's songs when they're recorded by other artists. And Neil Young, I really like Harvest Moon and Harvest. But I'm going to have to give this one to Neil Young, I guess. Again, I'm not crazy about either one of these artists, but I can listen to Neil Young's singing voice more than I can Bob Dylan's. Next is a classic one from the 90s, Oasis versus Blur. I'm a big Oasis fan. I'm a huge fan of Noel Gallagher's songwriting. I do like Blur. I like their album, just called Blur. I have their album Coffee and TV, I think it's what it's called, or 13, I don't know. But anyways, Blur's a little bit too artsy fartsy for me, so I'm gonna have to go with Oasis on this one, hands down. Next we have Blondie versus the Pretenders. I have a greatest hits album from Blondie in my collection. I don't have any Pretenders, but I gotta say, I know more hits from the Pretenders than I do Blondie, so I'm a fan of Chrissie Hynde. This has to go to the Pretenders for me. Next we have David Bowie versus Prince. Oh man, this is tough. I'm a big fan of Prince's radio hits, but other than that, I don't know much of his back catalog. Kind of like what Shannon said in her video, Prince tends to be a little too funky and very sexual in his song lyrics. So I'm gonna have to go with David Bowie. I have a lot of David Bowie's albums in my collection, from Aladdin Sane, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, all the way up through Black Star. So David Bowie for this one. Next we have Led Zeppelin versus Pink Floyd. Led Zeppelin. I like Pink Floyd, but I like their albums from like Metal through The Wall. Don't care much for the stuff that was done with Syd Barrett. I don't really care much for anything that was released in the 80s and beyond. Everything that Zeppelin has put out has been consistent. I like it all, so Led Zeppelin. Next we have Bruce Springsteen versus Tom Petty. Tom Petty, hands down. I like Bruce Springsteen. I like his hits on the radio. I like his albums from Asbury Park up through Born in the USA, but I really don't know much after that. Yes, there were a few songs like Philadelphia and some other ones that were like featured in movies and on soundtracks that I like, but for consistency's sake, I like Tom Petty a whole lot. I have almost his entire collection on vinyl, and I just feel like Tom Petty was an excellent singer-songwriter. I mean, not to say that Bruce isn't, but Tom Petty, I mean, I grew up with him. Running Down a Dream, I still remember that video vividly on MTV. Mary Jane's Last Dance. I love his album Wildflowers. So Tom Petty. Next we have The Jam versus XTC. I like Paul Weller a lot. I don't have anything by The Jam or Paul Weller in my vinyl collection. I do have a maxi single on 12-inch from XTC that features the song Dear God. But I'm going to say The Jam on this one, simply because I like Paul Weller, and I like what I've heard from The Jam. Next we have Paul Simon versus Joni Mitchell. I don't have anything by Joni Mitchell in my collection, so I'm going to go with Paul Simon on this one. I like Paul Simon. I'm a big fan of his song Kodachrome. I like the stuff he did on Graceland, so Paul Simon for this one. Fleetwood Mac versus Queen. I like Fleetwood Mac, the Buckingham Nicks era of Fleetwood Mac and McVie, but I'm gonna have to go with Queen on this one. I know more hits from Queen than I do Fleetwood Mac, so Queen. Elvis Costello versus The Police. I like Elvis Costello and some of his early stuff from the 70s. Not a fan of a lot of his stuff after that. I like The Police a lot too. I'm gonna have to go with The Police only because I'm more familiar with their albums and their catalog than I am Elvis Costello's. Well, there you have it, folks. That's the list that Rob Walker put together. I've got 3 that I'd like to throw into the ring myself. Starting with Queens of the Stone Age versus the Foo Fighters. Last year and early this year, I was able to fill in a lot of holes in my Queens of the Stone Age collection. I'm a big fan of Josh Homme and his singing and his songwriting style. I like the guitar work in their music. I really like Clockwork is one of my favorite albums. But I really like the Foo Fighters a lot too. Dave Grohl, I feel like, is an excellent singer-songwriter, a phenomenal drummer. He's a great guitar player. So for me, I'm going to have to go with the Foo Fighters simply because I've been a Foo Fighters fan longer than I've been a fan of Queens of the Stone Age. Next is Radiohead versus Muse. I've always felt like Tom York and Matthew Bellamy have very similar vocal qualities. They're both altos. I've been a fan of Radiohead since their debut album Pablo Honey. I've been a fan of Muse since their debut album Showbiz. I really like the album Uprising and Absolution. OK Computer from Radiohead is a masterpiece in my mind. But Radiohead kind of lost me there for a little while. After Amnesiac, I kind of lost interest in Radiohead. They kind of reeled me back in with In Rainbows. But then they kind of lost me again with their latest album, Moonshaped Pool. So I'm going to have to go with Muse on this one, as much as it pains me to say that. Muse has been consistent with their albums. I've really liked everything they put out. So in the battle of Radiohead versus Muse, Muse. The last one that I want to throw into the ring is the Guitar Gods. Jimi Hendrix versus Eric Clapton. I've been a big fan of Eric Clapton since Unplugged. I like everything he did with Cream. I like what he did with Blind Faith. Derek and the Dominoes, Layla, and other sort of love songs is a great album in my opinion. I really like Clapton's solo work, but then you got Hendrix and his work with the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It's kind of hard to top that. gosh, I really respect both as guitarists. So this may offend some of you all, but I'm gonna have to go with. Well, there you have it, folks. For all my friends in the United States, happy 4th of July. For everyone else, hope you are doing well and you had a great weekend. And until next time, take care. Thanks.